ever wanted to learn what does it really take to be a leader in today's society, he's going to chime in and give you some secrets, okay? And you can't share with anybody, right, Peter? These are secrets that you cannot reveal with anybody.
So poor Nailu's been wondering why I don't want to give her my slides, because I don't want to reveal my secret.
Exactly. All right, with no further ado, Peter Stevens, it's all yours.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm going to turn on the screen share here, and one of my favorite features of Zoom is how it completely rearranges my screen when I start the screen share. So I got to find stuff and make sure that things are going again. Okay, so we got that going, and we got the chat window open, and so we're good to go. Now let's see if my buffer is still there. Yeah, so I put some links about me into the chat window, which you may or may not wish to follow. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll be happy to connect back. I'd like to start off by expressing a great thank to Rick and to Nailu for the invitation and for the organization to make this possible. We're going to talk about Agile. Well, we're going to talk about leadership, okay? And just by coincidence, Agile or agility forms a pretty good basis for leadership. And so we're going to talk about what makes for an Agile leader. Now, my claim to fame here, my day job is I'm a Scrum trainer. About 5 years ago, I started asking the question, how can I apply Scrum to my own life? And that question took me to some very interesting places. I think the most interesting place was the question, what really matters? And by getting clarity on what really matters, all of a sudden, all sorts of interesting things become possible. You now have navigation stars to guide your life. And eventually, this got its own name called Personal Agility. In the meantime, I have co-founded with my fellow CST Scrum trainer, Maria Mattarelli, the Personal Agility Institute. We're based in St. Petersburg, at least the last time I looked. It might be Tampa. I can never quite tell the two apart. But anyway, we are Florida-based, and our vision is really simple, where people can live and work according to things that matter. Okay, and it turns out that when people do that, all of a sudden their lives, their work, their situations can change dramatically for the better. Our mission, and we've seen some really dramatic stories, and in some ways, I think the stories I'm going to tell you tonight are not even the most dramatic, but we've seen some really huge changes and for the better. And our mission is to enable 1 million people and companies to change their situation measurably and obviously for the better. Okay, now who gets to measure it? Well, obviously the people and companies involved. Okay, so this is not about us telling you, what is a life of meaning. It's about enabling you to figure out, what's meaning for you and then live according to that. And this message has been resonating. We're up around 30 ambassadors around the world. We're now starting a recognized trainer program. And so we just signed our first recognized trainer in Australia. We have another one in the run queue in Sri Lanka. You'll notice why I ask about certain questions. What I'd like to do, that's a couple of words about me. I might say 1 or 2 more words, but I'd like to see who's in the room. So maybe could we all turn our cameras on for a moment for a selfie? I don't know, do people do that? I like selfies. Who likes selfies? Okay, like to get a selfie for the road.
Yeah, so Nailu, change the view so that we can see everyone. That would be a great. So I'm putting gallery view right now. We're gonna take a snapshot of this as well. So everyone, please turn on your cameras. Let's go, Anna, let's do it. Frank, great job. Olga, I know what you look like, Olga. Let's turn on your video camera. All right. So whenever you're ready, did you want to take the snapshot, Peter?
Well, you can take a snapshot, and I'll take a snapshot, and
great.
Let's see. So we've got 4 rows of people in the room. Big smile and a wave. Okay, and we've got somebody's thumb. That looks really good. But
let's take one for me. 3, 2, 1. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. So what I'd like you to do, we've got this fun little feature in Zoom called Reactions. Now you go to the Zoom, little menu where you got your control center, and you might be able to see. I'm not sure if you can see it or if you have to go to the dot menu at the bottom. But you get to call up the reactions, and you get to put little things like this, okay, which are a lot of fun. I see Rick found it. So what I'd like you to do is, let's see who's in the room. Are you a developer? Is anyone here developing software? Whoops, come back here. That's gotten ahead of me. Come back. Help. Okay, one person at a time. So let's start with, well, I guess I thought I was going to do this line by line, but never mind. So why don't you give me a wave if you're a developer? Anyone here a developer? Okay. You know, it's kind of interesting. You get a room full of people in a software department and you say, who's a developer? And no one holds up their hand. And then you ask the next question and you say, is anybody here a tester? And then people, no, we don't test software here. We just develop it. Okay. Anyone here an Agilist? Anyone believe in the Agile Manifesto? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Anybody here, anyone here hate Agile? I mean, there's this whole thing about the Agile industrial complex. Anybody hate Agile? Give me the shocked face if you hate Agile. Okay. This is actually not very good because this is we got one person here. Okay, Laura, thank you very much. Otherwise we would have a lack of diversity. Okay. If you don't have someone who doesn't belong to your choir, it's kind of hard to get the right answers here. Anybody here in a leadership role? Maybe an Agile leadership role. So like Agile coach, Scrum master, product owner. Okay. Anybody here have a more formal management role? Like a line manager, product manager, or project manager, maybe second line manager, executive. Okay. Okay. So we got a fairly diverse group. A lot of leadership influence is what I'm seeing. So let's a couple words about me. I mentioned that I'm the founder of the Personal Agility Institute. I discovered Scrum back in 2006. Actually, I discovered it in 1993. I stumbled upon it, but didn't really realize what it was until much, much later. And agility has been this tremendous gift to my life because it's enabled me to see the world and try out new things. Who is from Seattle? This is in Linwood, Washington, the home of Wikispeed. And I had met Joe Justice in Vietnam, of all places, for a conference. And this led to an invitation to come drop by in Seattle. And my son and I are learning to apply Agile techniques, in particular pairing, to build a car. And so anyway, in the course of that day, we started pairing with two members of the Wikispeed team. And this picture was taken a bit later in the day when we were able to pair with each other. And by the end of the day, we were able to take apart the complete front end, dismount the wheels, dismount the brakes, disconnect the steering, reconnect everything, align the steering. And we celebrated by making a film as we drove around the test track after we'd finished reassembling the car. So, agility is really generally amazingly useful. I've started a couple of initiatives. One is the Scrum Ambassadors. We're an international group of trainers. Our goal is to make Agile knowledge available around the world. And I'm also the founder or co-founder of a thing called the World Agility Forum, which was held for the 4th time this weekend, where we celebrate successful applications of agility at the personal and company level around the world. And we also have honest discussions about the challenges of being agile in the world. And so that was a pretty, maybe kind of after, if we have some time at the end, you can ask me some questions about that. That was pretty cool. And if you recognize that logo, that gives you kind of a rough idea. That logo was new when I got there. That gives you a rough idea when I was at Microsoft. If anyone would like to take a guess how many people were there at the beginning, you can put it in the chat and I'll tell you if you were warm or cold. So, like many Scrum trainers and Agile coaches, I talk frequently to executives. I facilitate a group of mostly former customers who say, we want to be Agile and we see benefit. It's called the Agile Executives. What questions do they ask about agility? Okay, and the first for a lot of them, agility is just buzzwords. Is there any substance to it at all? What are the buzzwords about? Okay, once they get past the buzzwords and discover that it's something real, then they got questions about their company, like how can they innovate faster? How can they get their people talking to each other? How can we educate our clients if this has impact on our business? How do we become a better business? For instance, by delighting the customer through the use of agility. And then eventually it kind of comes back down to the leaders themselves. How can I make it a success? And this is really the key question. What does it mean for me? Because we all know that there's that whole fear thing. And if I don't think it's going to be good for me, I don't really care what it does for the company because I want things that are good for, everyone wants to kind of, keep their jobs and have things to do and have a secure thing to do and keep their position. So what we're going to do, what I'd like to do is kind of take a look at agile leadership. What I want to do is I want to start with that question, what does it mean to be agile? What is this whole thing, agility, about? And agility is something that means different things to different people. Then, of course, I'm going to share my 3 secrets. And then we'll talk a little bit about how those 3 secrets help you deal with complexity. Okay, so let's start with what does it mean to be agile? Okay, now we've got some managers in the room, so I always put out this content warning at the beginning. We're going to have some adult. I've actually been talked into keeping the adult language out of it because it triggers people. So we talk in government, and that's not such a good idea. So we try not to trigger people, but some of the truths might be inconvenient. So if there's anybody who's kind of has a weak stomach, this is your time to click on a different channel and go back to the Disney Channel. On the other hand, one of the things I've noticed is just as kind of the media has become more honest over time, think of the TV shows that were so wholesome and sweet, back when you were a kid. And, now we have, well, I don't want to go into details about what we have. Let's just say we have Netflix, and that kind of covers it. Okay, so we're able to deal with these truths. So everyone with me? Okay, last chance. So let's talk about what agility means. Now, this is an Agile group, so you all have probably heard of the Agile Manifesto. You'll notice how the Agile Manifesto kind of came in bottom up. And that was good. And then somewhere along the line, the upper reaches of management discovered agility and said, hey, this works, go do Scrum. And this brought some problems of its own. And what's starting to emerge more recently is what I'll call a constructive or a synthesis, which is kind of co-created between the top and the bottom, and is generally recognized as universally useful. Okay, and this is based on work by Steve Denning, who's actually studied large companies and tried to understand that were trying to become agile at the top levels, and tried to understand what did agility mean for them. Now, for a lot of people, agility is the tools of the processes. Okay, we got Scrum, we got Safe, we got Jira. Okay, hold up your hand if you love Jira. Okay, never mind. Okay, we got a couple of people who love Jira. I was worried about that. We have some people who find that concept a bit amusing. And it's interesting because some tools have been very, very compatible with agility. Jira and Safe have been very, very successful in the corporate marketplace. More interesting question is to what extent do they carry that agile spirit? But just for the record, there are companies that have managed to become agile and do Safe at the same time. So these things are not mutually exclusive. But this is not where agility started. Okay, where agility started was with software developers. And the software developers, this was the dawn of the internet. There was the dot-com boom. Developing software was always difficult. And I remember my father telling me about the software backlog. And if I could figure out a solution to that problem, that would be amazing. Okay, this is back in the, 60s or 70s when I was growing, probably more like the 70s when I was in high school. So anyway, these guys got together and they said, well, all of these processes that they're making us do, they're not really very helpful. And they started developing an alternative vision. So let's take a closer look. I'm not going to go through the details of this because you've probably seen it before, but most people, and maybe this is already a secret, because most people kind of have overlooked a part of the manifesto. Okay, we all talk about the Agile mindset, but what is the Agile mindset? And the most overlooked sentence in every presentation about the Agile manifesto I ever saw talked about the values and the principles and everything. But they didn't talk about that first sentence. We're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others to do it. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer, period. The rest is just details. And what I'd like to do is let's talk about that uncovering better ways. This is about learning. Okay, let's just ignore that developing software part and just replace that with doing whatever it is that you do by doing it and helping others to do it. Okay, helping others to do it. So now, first of all, we're practitioners and it's about collaboration. And finally, that sentence the essential meaning is the first half, not the second half. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer. Okay, so what do we have here? Learning, collaboration, and purpose. Okay, and if you go look for what is the agile mindset, what is an agile culture, I would argue that an agile culture values learning, collaboration, and purpose. And someone who has the agile mindset values learning, collaboration, and purpose. Now, we talked about the rise of fake agile or fake agility. And basically what it amounts to is, the software people, they said, hey, this stuff works, and they got some success deploying it at the departmental level of companies. And eventually it kind of percolated up to top management. And they said, you need to be more agile. And what did top management have to say? Well, you guys, you can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't impact my bonus. Okay, and so we kind of had this glass ceiling problem of agility, just like we did in various other pursuits. And so that kind of limited our ability to have real impact on, how our companies worked and what they could achieve. On the other hand, a bit later, sooner or later, even management noticed that this stuff was working. And so we got a new problem, okay? We got that command to do Scrum, okay? Now, of course, if you tell someone to self-organize, the first thing they're gonna do is they're gonna say no, and you give them a whole ton of processes, and they say, well, what am I supposed to do with this? And this doesn't actually help my job. Okay, I think this is where a lot of the resistance to agility has been coming from, is that we've just been overwhelmed with the command form. So what is the synthesis of these two things? Well, some companies, their management did get it. They understood what agility was about, and they started trying to apply it at all levels of the organization, including the top levels. Now, Steve Denning is what I would call the first kind of traditional manager or traditional management author who got interested in agility. Okay, so Steve was a manager at the World Bank. He stumbled on storytelling as a way to enable change. He was able to catalyze a change at the World Bank. Imagine a bank and imagine international government, and you've got two of the most ossified industries that you can think of all wrapped into one. So things didn't move there very quickly. Until Steve was able to tell a compelling story about how the World Bank could be a force for achieving its vision, which they weren't at the time. And all of a sudden, that story resonated. And all of a sudden, people all over the bank wanted to do it. So that got him, he became the guru of storytelling and spent 10 years of his career propagating storytelling as a way to lead change, until he noticed that the storytelling initiatives that started all around the world, they were all dying. And he found the cause of that death in management itself, which is not very compatible with any sort of creative initiative. So long story short, he wrote a book called Radical Management. He thought he was going to have to reinvent management. Along the way, he discovered lean and agility and a couple of other things and said, oh, the stuff is already out there, we're just not doing it. And eventually he became a member of the board of directors and started an initiative called the Learning Consortium. He wanted to see if there were any companies out there that were trying to be agile at the leadership level, and he found a few. And then they started collaborating, and Steve is a very prolific writer and a very acute observer of what's going on. And he says, what do these companies have in common? And he identified 3 laws. The first he called the law of the customer, which is about focusing on customer needs, not just existing customers, but also new customers and new markets. The second he called the law of the network. Information can flow freely without friction through the organization to seize opportunities and fix problems. And finally, the law of small teams. Okay, that these very effective organizations, they tended to form small teams, generally less than 10, to get actual work done. And this was a common recurring theme in all these successful organizations. Now, Steve and I have been collaborating probably since the radical management days, and we had a lot of talks like this about whether his vision of Agile is compatible with the Agile Manifesto or not, because managers like to learn from other managers. They don't really believe that software developers have anything to teach them. Software developers work for managers. If it were the other way around, it would be the other way around, but it's not. So for Steve, agility was the law of the network, the law of small teams, and the law of the customer. How does that match up with agility as conceived of by these software developers? Well, it turns out they're surprisingly similar. The purpose is about the customer. The law of the network is about learning, and the law of small teams is about collaboration. So what we're seeing is that there's actual evidence that agility, seen at all levels of the organization, if you look at it abstractly enough, they're the same thing. There's no difference between agility for the organization and agility as it was envisioned in the Agile Manifesto. Now, when I go to a company and talk to their executives about their challenges, what do they want to get out of their company? Remember those questions I asked? Most of them match very nicely to one of those three laws of agility. It's either about the customer, about the flow of information, or about creating teams that can collaborate with each other as opposed to silos. Now, as we know, agility is a topic for leadership. It's been in the Harvard Business Review. It's been in the Wall Street Journal. Note the title in the Wall Street Journal, "Are you agile enough for agile management?" Well, that sounds a little scary, doesn't it? Okay, and that's kind of one of the big differences between kind of classical management and agile leadership. Agile leadership is not based on fear. Okay, and this is why it's like a whole change of operating system. It's like going from Windows to Mac or either one of them to Linux. It's very, very difficult to move a program from one onto the other, and this is a big part of our challenge today. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you now about these three secrets, things that I have observed in myself and in other leaders related to agility, about how to be more effective. So, and we're going to do the basis. We're going to do this on the basis of actual stories, actual leaders revealing their secrets. You didn't think I was going to reveal these secrets too quickly. Rick is probably about to kill me because he asked me for one of the secrets and I didn't give it to him. Okay, so Rick, do you have an idea yet what the secrets could be?
I have no idea what the secrets are. Okay, I'm going to let everyone else
hiding in plain sight. Okay, so here we go. Let's start with the first secret. Change is easy if you want to do it. Now, if you go to any agile coach, he or she will tell you, no, change is hard. It's really hard. Okay, well, changing yourself is easy. You can do it like that. Getting the person sitting across the table from you, getting them to change can be really difficult. Ask any husband, wife, or other what it is to get their spouse or their kids to change their mind. Really, really difficult. But if you want to change, you can do that right away. You can turn on a dime. Okay? And I want to start with a story about myself. And it's a story that probably, well, I don't know, the pictures here all look very slim and trim. I'm not sure if you could relate to the story or not, but it's my story. Losing 10 kilos. Now, losing weight is kind of an interesting problem because, your traditional agile approach, it's somehow representable. You can represent it in a Kanban board, waiting, working, done. I'm going to do this. I got these things I could do. I put one of them in the to-do column, and then when it's done, I move it to the done column. Okay, great, piece of cake. But what about losing weight? Because, ultimately losing weight isn't about things that you move from waiting to working to done. It's about not doing things or doing the things that you're going to do anyway, doing them differently. So how does that apply to agility? Okay. And this for me is kind of the problem. It's not all about the movements of those small green pieces of paper from left to right. So here's the problem. I realized that my weight had gotten to the point, my wife was making friendly comments, my shirts were a little bit tight, and bending over to tie my shoes was getting to be a bit challenging. Now, on the scale of weight problems that people can have, that's still in the area of not too bad, and so everyone has got their own experiences, and I'm not trying to say anything about what your experience is or should be. But for me, the weight was getting to the point, was kind of in the way, but somehow I didn't really feel a need to do anything about it. Until a friend of mine said to me, have you noticed how you feel after eating sugar? The high and the low. And I said, I'm a guy, I don't notice things like this. I said, oh, okay. And a couple of days later, I don't know, I had a pizza for lunch, and then I noticed how at lunch I was kind of like this, but by the time I got back to the office, I was like this. That's the sugar high. And more importantly, that's the sugar low. And I realized I didn't really like that feeling. And then we talked about it. It says, well, one of the easiest ways to lose weight is simply to avoid sugar and carbohydrates, okay? Because carbohydrates turn into sugar, and all of that goes to your belly or wherever fairly quickly. And if you, it's called a keto diet. If you stop eating sugar and carbohydrates, you get the level below a certain point, and your body switches over, and it starts metabolizing the fat. And all of a sudden, after about 2 or 3 weeks of doing this, the kilos just melt away. And so I said, okay, well, gee, I don't like how it makes me feel, so I'm going to avoid sugar and carbohydrates. Now, this is not easy to do. Now, I was doing a lot of traveling at this point, and what you see here is a fairly typical hotel breakfast counter, which, as you see, is about 80% sugar, and what's not sugar is carbohydrates. Okay, so it's and I said, no. It's like being a vegetarian at the meat counter. You look at it and say, there's nothing for me here. Let's go find something else. Okay, and so there are 2 things that I did here. One of which is I tied this to how I felt. Okay, it gave me a reason. I just kind of remembered that feeling, and somehow there's remembering a feeling is somehow it's I don't know. It's just more compelling. And the other thing I did, you notice how I said I want to avoid sugar? That doesn't mean I'm totally going to eliminate sugar, but it makes it possible for me to forgive myself if I give in to one of those chocolate eclairs. Okay. And so we can think about it something like this. Okay. I'd like you to imagine you're the captain of a sailing ship. Okay. Back in the days before there was GPS, back in the days before there were motors that would take you smoothly across the sea, you're basically in a big sailboat and you want to navigate across the ocean. Okay. So in this case, we're going to go from Portugal to Jamaica. Now, how do you do that? How do you get from here to there? Well, the first thing you do is you say, well, where is Jamaica? Where am I going? You plot your course, and then you set sail. Okay. Now, how do you know where you are in the middle of the ocean? And it turns out that's a non-trivial problem. It took humanity about, 1,500 years to figure it out. And basically, the way you do it is you look at where the stars are, particularly just as just at sunset, what stars are coming above the horizon. Where is the pole star? If you know what time it is, with those 3 pieces of information, you can figure out your position. And so you figure out your position, you plot it on the map, and you say, am I on course? And if you're on course, then life is good, and you keep sailing in the same direction. And if you're off course, you say, oh, well, I got to get back on course, and you adjust your course accordingly. Now, that's all fine and good, except what happens if you get caught in a storm? Okay, we got a couple of problems. So the first problem is you can't see the horizon, okay, because there's cloud cover. So there's no horizon, no stars, no sun, no pole star, no nothing. Okay, and the other thing is that ocean is relatively large and your boat is relatively small, which means there may be things like waves crashing over the railing, and you may be more worried about keeping the boat afloat than you are about maintaining your course to Jamaica. Okay, and in general, not letting the boat sink is generally considered a good idea. In fact, the alternative is what we call game over. Okay. Now, anybody who's played a computer game knows that game over isn't really game over. It's just an invitation to put another quarter in the machine. But that's something for another day. So basically, you're in the storm, you're fighting the storm, you're keeping the boat afloat, you're dealing with the urgent things in life. Okay. So what does this represent? Well, Jamaica, your destination, that's something important that you want to achieve. Okay, and that storm, that's all that urgent stuff. That's your kids who need to be taken to soccer practice. That's your boss who's calling you with an urgent thing to do, or your customer coming with new requests that may or may not be important, but somehow you feel compelled to do. Okay, so what happens? When we go back to the high seas, well, step 1 is to keep the boat afloat. At some point, things are going to calm down, and then the sky clears. And you can see the stars again, and you've got a moment to navigate. Say, okay, where am I? Where's Jamaica? Now, in this particular case, oh, yes. In this particular case, I got to tell you about my perfect storm. Does anybody here know Trader Joe's? Does anybody recognize these? Okay, well, peanut butter cups were like my weakness as a child in the US. Okay, I grew up in the US and came here in my 20s. And back then it was Hershey's. Trader Joe's is, I think, kind of raised the bar on peanut butter cups. And remember I said I lost, I think 8 kilos of my goal to losing 10. Well, over Christmas time, my parents and just about everybody I knew in my family decided what I really needed for Christmas was some Trader Joe's peanut butter cups. So I ended up with about 4 pounds of peanut butter cups. And I tried to hand them off to my family. They weren't having any of it. And you know what? Remember that stuff about I'm avoiding sugar? Well, that storm came and I did what I had to do and I ate all of the peanut butter cups till about January. Yes. Okay. Now, remember those 8 kilos that I lost? Well, somehow I managed to find 2 of them again. But it also kind of challenged my, well, do I really want to go to Jamaica? You know, do I really want to lose these kilos? How do I feel? How do I feel about it? And I was actually able to say, you know, I still don't like how sugar makes me feel. I want to get out of that. And so I actually went back to my diet. And eventually, I think I was down 14 kilos at my lowest point, although I had a bit of a flu, which may have helped that. And so once I got to the weight that I wanted, I said, this is where I want to go. Jamaica's over there. That means cut down on the sugar. And I cut down on the sugar. Now, what is it? First of all, it's about the desire. If you want to do it, you can do it. Okay. And I don't even think it's about, being of strong-willed. It's just being clear about what you want to do and what you don't want to do and what you care about. And if you get off course, well, that happens. Get back, don't worry about it. Where's your destination? Where's Jamaica? In this case, it's about 100 degrees to the right. So, set course for Jamaica and go back to sailing forward. Okay. Now, Heather, I see that you got your hand up. I think what I'd like to do is finish the talk so we see that we get through everything on time, and then we'll hang around for a bit to take questions afterwards. Okay. So here's the thing. It's your ship. You are not only the captain of the ship, you are, in the case of your life, you are the owner of the ship. You get to decide where it goes. If you want to do this, you can do that. If you want to do something else, you can do something else. And either way, from an absolute sense, excuse me, in an absolute sense, it's okay. You get to decide. In the language of Scrum, you're the product owner of your life. You may or may not be the product owner of your project at work. That's a different situation. But the logic of that project is the same. So here is the thing. Change is easy if you want to do it. Okay, so I guess the next thing is to say, well, get clear on what you want to do. Okay, and this actually takes me to the second secret, which is being clear on what really matters. Now, maybe you go to one of your stakeholders in a project and you say, what are we trying to achieve with this project? You go to 3 stakeholders and you get 15 different answers. Okay, now you got a little bit of a problem because there's not much agreement. Okay, and this, by the way, is why I call myself Mr. Alignment, because what I try to do is help the stakeholders figure out what really matters to them. Now, we talk a lot about the vision thing, but it turns out the interactions are as important, if not more important, to keeping a group of people together and moving in a direction. Okay, this idea is called emergence, individuals interacting with each other to make something bigger than themselves. So like, if you look at this picture, you see we got a flock of birds. Okay, you can't say here, you can kind of tell where the flock is and where it's not, but you zoom in on it and all you see are birds. Okay, it's the interactions between the birds that make the flock. It turns out this is a hugely helpful leadership principle, and it's also the first value of the Agile Manifesto: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, emergence over process. Okay. Now, Tobias Meyer just had a post on LinkedIn. He talked about relationships as being what happens between individuals. So I'm actually thinking that relationships might be another word for emergence, or it might be that relationships drive the emergence. Okay, but this is I think one of the really deep secrets of how to lead an organization is to not simply set the goal, but to guide the emergence. And I want to give you an example of that. Okay, back in the 1960s, we had the space race. Back in the 1960s, we had the Apollo program. The Apollo program is often used as the example. What is a SMART goal? Specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, time box, etc. Okay, now I had the privilege of listening to former astronauts, mission controllers, and administrators from both the American and the Soviet side of the space race, talking about why did the Americans get there first. And it's funny, they didn't actually say that this was the answer, but I was listening to them. And these were these three sentences came up over and over on the American side. Okay? Every member of the Apollo mission knew, and those were 400,000 people in the government, civilian part and in the military and in the civil economy. Everybody knew these three things. One, we're going to the moon. Okay? Number two, it's not going to fail because of me. And if anything goes wrong, remember rule number one. Okay? And that told everybody from the members of Congress to the seamstresses making the spacesuits what they had to do. If anything went wrong, you leave a needle in the fabric of a spacesuit, well, that could cause a puncture, that could cause the astronaut to die on the moon. And believe me, the astronauts went to the factory in Dover, Delaware, and they said, ladies, if there's a hole in that spacesuit, I'm going to die. Remember, it's not going to fail because of me. And that got everybody focused and moving in the right direction. Today, we see the same sort of clarity of purpose at SpaceX. Where one of the questions that they can always ask themselves is, how does this help us get to Mars? Because that's what they're here for. So this is at the scale of a very large organization. It also works at a very personal level. This was one of my first customers for personal agility. He was overwhelmed with the amount of work that he had to do. He'd taken out a company. The company was not doing well and it was having financial problems. And he had to let people go, and someone had to do the work. And eventually he was trying to do it all by himself, and he was working 80 hours a day. And so he came to me, we started doing personal agility. You'll see that personal agility looks a lot like Scrum or Kanban. We've got a board here we call the priorities map. There's the this week column, which is the waiting column, something like the forecast or the sprint backlog in Scrum. We have the today column and we have the done column. Okay, but we also have the what really matters column. Okay, this is an information radiator reminding you what you really care about. And then we have the possibilities column and the urgent column. And these guys are for triage. This is for saying, okay, of all the things we could do, what's important, what's urgent. And since I took this picture, we've also added what's going to make me happy. And we use that to do a triage to pick what we're going to do this week. Now, in the case of Jörg, his top item was save the company. He had seven or eight things, or 7 or 8 groups of categories that were all urgent. The top one was save the company. Okay, so he starts working on that. 2 weeks later, he comes back to my office. We're going to review and see how it went. And he was not happy because he still had too much to do. There was still, support for the old product, development for the new product, work with the investors. It was just too much. And I could tell he left my office not feeling very happy. He hadn't gotten the answer. Okay, and I found out 2 weeks later when he came back, just as he left the building, he had this aha moment. Okay, just as he left the building, he asked himself the question, what really matters? And he says, you know what? I do want to save the company, but I want to have a decent life. And with that, he hopped in the car, drove home, opened the door, told his wife, honey, I'm home. I've had a revelation. And she says, oh, yeah. I really want to save the company. And she says, yes. But what I really want to do is have a decent life. And she said, oh, that's interesting. What does that mean? And he said, well, how about we go see a movie tonight? And she was like, you haven't suggested that in 1.5 years. Okay, so notice what we get here. We get clarity of purpose, gives us the ability to change direction, explain it to the others, and the people around you will recognize that immediately. Okay, we saw the same thing when Howard Sublett of the Scrum Alliance went up in front of an audience of 400 people, some of them friends of the Scrum Alliance, some of them not so friends, some of them very critical of the Scrum Alliance. He said, guys, we're here to transform the world of work. It's not about the money. And everybody in the room started rethinking their relationship with the Scrum Alliance. Okay, so the thing is, I would give 2 things. I actually think this is 2 tips now. One is harness emergence. Okay, we got these rules of engagement. Okay, how does this help us get to Mars? And the other thing is clarity of purpose. I thought they were the same, but now I would actually say they're two different things, one of which is really focused on the interactions, the other is on the goal, but in both cases, people will notice the difference right away. Okay, so like I said, we're going to take questions at the end, and I'm going to take you to the third secret. Okay, and the third secret is for your leaders, the software developers have already figured out how to solve the problem because they got confronted with it back in the 90s. Okay, and this takes me to the story of Walter Stulzer. Walter was one of the, he was an award winner at the World Agility Forum 2 years ago. When I got involved with him, he had, well, let me tell the story. He was a partner in a creative consultancy in Zurich. And the partners had a difference of opinion about how to run the company. And so basically each of the partners took their piece of the company and split off. So it was a fission, fusion coming together, fission coming apart. It was the result of a fission of a larger partnership. And the problem is Walter's personal goal was, he wanted to step back and retire, but he wanted to leave behind a functioning company. His company wasn't functioning, and wasn't functioning means red ink, okay? And red ink is not such a good thing. He realized he had a problem. He realized he needed to do things, and his team realized they needed to do things. So what they did is they dedicated 10% of their capacity to improving the company. They thought about what they needed to do, and they created a long list of initiatives. And they gave themselves 2 years to solve the problems, okay? 33 different initiatives, each with their goals. Where do you think they were 2 years later? How many of those initiatives do you think that they had achieved? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Maybe put a number in the chat. How many of those initiatives do you think were successful? I'm going to count internally to 5 while you find the chat window and put a number from 1 to 33. So I see 3, I see 1, I see 0, I see another, I see a big fat 0. Yes, 20. Okay. We have a plurality for 0. Okay, and that was actually when he first told me the story. He said, no, we didn't achieve any of them. Turns out that wasn't quite true. His company did manage to create a new logo. Okay, but the logo didn't actually solve his problems. So this is where I got involved, and we talked about both agility for Walter, for the executive director. We talked about agility within the leadership team and how this might work. And we also talked about the importance of being part of the solution. And Walter committed to be part of the solution. So he trained with his team. He was product owner in the Scrum training. I trained him on personal agility, and I trained his whole team on Scrum and agility in general. Once again, they dedicated 10% of their capacity. But this time, instead of trying to do everything at once, they worked in iterations. Okay, now that was to scale, both in terms of the number of items that they decided to do, and that was 1/4 of the time going by. Okay, after 6 months, how many of their goals do you think they'd achieved? Okay, and once again, let's put in the number on this 0 to 50. I think there were 15, so it was half the, so I'm seeing 5, most if not all. 15, okay? And in fact, this is exactly what happened. They had achieved all of the goals. And the amazing thing about it is they'd achieved everything they needed to do. It turns out that half of the ideas, they didn't need to do them, or actually they were done as a side effect of some of the other things that they got done. So what this translated to was basically achieving all the goals, half the work, 1/4 of the time. Okay, now maybe you've heard Jeff Sutherland's thing, twice the work in half the time. He's got the proportions right, except it's, a factor of 2 too much work. It's all the goals, half the work, 1/4 of the time. Okay, and for him, what was important was the finances, because he had to get the finances under control. Turns out he also had a problem with staff turnover, which was also pretty frightening, and he got that under control. What made this work? Well, for him, it was about committing to making this a success. First, they talk about why, then they talk about what. Okay, now they use Scrum, a lightweight version of Scrum for improving the company. Notice they were only working 10% on their Scrum, but when they were in the Scrum, they were doing it. They did a daily Scrum, they always worked in pairs. They did sprint reviews every 3 weeks or so. For Walter, what enabled him to do this was this notion of having his own personal, this is where I need to be. Okay, he was really worried about the deer in the headlights phenomenon. If he told the staff of his company how dire the situation was, he was afraid they were going to freeze. So what he needed to do as the leader, he needed to end each week with satisfaction. He needed to start each week with confidence, and he couldn't do that with an endless backlog. Okay, so what is an agile transformation? What does this mean for an agile transformation? Well, the first thing to do is get clear on what it is we're trying to do. We are restructuring the company. This is not a trivial change at the lower levels of the organization. This is a restructuring of the company, which means it's something that happens at the top level, at the board level, maybe the C-suite, probably the board level. What we're trying to do is be able to produce tangible results, new products, new innovations sooner. We need to be able to innovate better, okay? And finally, we're going to be transforming the culture, okay? And this was actually, I was just at the World Agility Forum listening to companies like Microsoft tell about their, transition with 25,000 people. The Commerce Bank, I think it was in Missouri, 5,000 people. Yes, they trained 3/4 of the company in Scrum and Agility, but it was really about the change in the mindset that started at the leadership and worked its way down through the organization. It's a cultural change more than anything else, and it touches the entire organization. Okay, so what does it mean to apply agility to leadership? Well, the first thing to do is to start with yourself. Okay, and what I'd like to do is maybe say, we got a couple minutes left. I'd like to say a few words about how to apply this to your own work. Okay, and the problem is everyone I've ever met, and certainly every leadership team I've ever met, they got too much to do and not enough time to do it. And this is where, we talk about the evils of multitasking. We got all these things to do. We only have so much capacity. So what do? We try to divide our capacity so we can take on everything. Okay. Now, the problem is when we do that, we are much, much slower. Okay. If you do the math, there's a rule of thumb that says for every additional task, you lose about 20% of your capacity to switching costs. By the time you've got 5 tasks in parallel, you've lost 75% of your capacity, and it takes you about half a year to do what you could have done in a week. Okay, so if we can eliminate the multitasking, and this is one of the key things of every agile framework, is eliminating the multitasking, reducing the work in progress. You do one thing, you get it done. Okay, then you do another thing, another thing, another thing. And notice here, after 5 weeks, we've gotten done what in a normal situation would have taken us half a year. Okay, this is why Scrum and Kanban, why they value focus so much. Okay, so basically the idea is to avoid bringing yourself to a crawl. But the other thing, and this is perhaps even more insidious, is that when you're working this hard, you got so much to do, you don't have time to stop and reflect. Now, some of the things that you do are going to make a difference. Okay, and by focusing on those things, you're going to have the impact that you set out to have. The problem is when you're working too hard, you spend a lot of time doing the stuff which is really just waste. Okay, so this is where what we're trying to do is stop doing things that don't bring value, and this is how you get faster. Now, why did I say this is in plain sight? Well, software developers have been doing this for 20 years. Okay, and management says, no, this doesn't apply to us. Okay, now, if you look at like version 1 talking about, every year they do the State of Agile report, and they discovered that, the practices that we see in Scrum are quite widespread. Whether they call it Scrum or not, that's not really the issue. When you look at it in management teams, okay, well, the first question I ask is, how many of these practices did Walter's team do? And the short answer was all of them. When I do, I'm not sure, I don't have this here. When I do polls in, of management teams or people talking about their management teams, hardly any are doing all of them, and maybe 10% or 10 to 15% are doing some of them. Okay, so this is, when we apply this to management, okay, we don't call them sprints anymore, we call it cadence. We don't call it a potentially releasable product, we call it tangible results. But when we start talking about producing tangible results in Cadence, we start talking about, focusing, large organizations, it's not uncommon to have 400 initiatives in progress. And once they start working in, once they start working in sprints, they realize, in Cadence, they realize they can't possibly do this and they need to focus. And then by focusing, that focus permeates through the organization. Okay. So basically, there's a huge potential to improve the performance of organizations. What we learned at the World Agility Forum is because of the impact of exponential change and the impact of technological convergence. If you're focused in one industry and you're not able to combine, your ideas with ideas from other industries, your company is toast. Okay, and the only way that you can fix that is a more agile attitude, bringing people together, across disciplines with new ideas. That's where the innovation is going to come from. So if you want to be the next Walter, this is the place to start. Couple of questions to ask to maybe get the conversation going with your leadership. How have you been spending your time? What have you actually been doing? How satisfied are you with how you're spending the time? How much of that was valuable to you? How much was busy work? If you're not happy with the answers, this is the time to start applying agility to the problem of managing your own time. Okay, and this is where personal agility can help. I see that we're getting to the top of the hour, so I'm not going to go too much into this now, but if people want to hang around for a few minutes, I can answer the questions as well. But basically what we try to do is bring out purpose, celebrate what we get done. Turns out getting things done is huge because you can celebrate stuff that you can get done. But when you've just got tons of stuff in progress, you tend to beat each other up, or people tend to beat each other up. Choice is about being intentional about what to do next so that we make sure that we're doing the stuff that really matters. And emergence is about creating things that are bigger than yourself so that a group of people can accomplish something that the individuals could not. Okay, and if you've got any questions about this, I'd encourage you to reach out to one of our ambassadors. The nearest one is probably in Tampa. So Maria's recruited a couple down at her end of the world. There are a couple on the East Coast. There are a couple in Europe. As you see, we're very much a worldwide community. This list is probably a little bit out of date. So Sharon's in Florida. Who else is in Florida? I know Maria is in Florida. I believe Pete Blum, I think Pete is in Florida. So yeah, so there's, and obviously for you guys who are someplace else or someplace else. The other thing is we announced yesterday that Sunday that our book is going to be published. What you're seeing here is this isn't the final cover. This is the version we gave to the designer who's going to make it look nice. Okay. Unlocking Higher Purpose, Alignment, and Performance. You can download a preprint on my website at this link. Anyway, so with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be pleased if you'd like to reach out to me. I will put those links again at the top of the chat, if I can. The chat's still there. Whoops, I've lost. I'll have to copy paste them again. But anyway, with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. I'm going to pass the talking stick back to Rick. And if you guys have got questions or whatever comes next, I'm happy to support that.
All right.